All right, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon on this very cold afternoon for this afternoon's webinar, How to Apply to the Folklife Apprenticeship Grant. My name is Ryan Coons, and I am MSAC Folklife Specialist, where I have the privilege of administering the Folklife Apprenticeship Grant, as well as a few other odds and ends. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We like to begin all public meetings of the Maryland State Arts Council with a series of grounding slides, both to get everyone on the same virtual page and to introduce ourselves to you, our constituents. Here you see a reference shot of the features of Google Meet, the communication platform we are using this afternoon. At this stage, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with those bells and whistles available. I'd like to draw your attention especially to here in the lower center left-hand corner, the microphone and video camera toggle buttons. Unless you are actively speaking, do please keep your microphones muted for audio quality since we are recording this afternoon. And in this second screenshot, you'll note in the bottom right-hand corner here, the chat function. Google Meet, unlike certain other communication platforms, has the chat be public to everyone. So anything you put in there will be visible to everyone. There's no private chat feature. As I said, we like to begin all public meetings with a series of grounding slides, and following the best practices of accessibility, I will read them aloud. MSAC's Land Acknowledgement Statement derives from the MSAC Land Acknowledgement Project, in which staff consulted with tribal communities whose lands are claimed by Maryland, paid them for their time, and put together an online public resource for you so that you can learn about land acknowledgements and, perhaps more importantly, learn about tribal peoples whose land we all occupy. You can find that resource at msac.org under the Resources tab. And again, I will read this aloud following the best practices of accessibility. We acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Akahannock Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Yakagani River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. MSAC's Equity and Justice Statement is that the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. MSAC and its supporting collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. MSAC's vision is that we play an essential role in showing every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And our mission is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. Our current strategic plan, created in 2019, features 5 goals. I will read just the bolded portions, and you're welcome to find out more about our broader strategic plan, which is currently being revised and updated, but you can find more information on that on our website, msac.org. Our current goals are to increase participation, to provide intentional support, to build capacity, to leverage connections, and to bolster Maryland arts. We invite you today to engage with us, follow it through these series of creative meeting actions, which are to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, to engage with everyone's presence as a gift, to acknowledge that together we know a lot, to enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, to share your ideas and trust that it will be heard, to use I statements, such as I think or I feel, to focus your language on the task at hand, to hold one another accountable with care, to apply yes and, as in I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it, and to balance speaking and listening. MSAC makes available a variety of free professional development opportunities. You are participating in one right now, and thank you so much for joining us. We also have a variety of other topic-specific sessions on a variety of topics that artists have requested, and if you see something that we are not doing that you would like, we hope you will get in touch with us. I'll also note that if you are not already signed up for our emailing list, I recommend that you do so. That's kind of the hot off the presses information, and can be found either through tinyurl.com/MSAC's mailing list. Please note that S, MSACS mailing list, or on our website under the About tab. We invite you to join us as a panelist, and I'll be talking more about this later in the presentation. But for those of you who have applied for and or received grants from MSAC, the reason that we are able to give money to you is because of panelists. Panelists are Maryland residents. They are experts in their field across the arts sector in Maryland. And this is paid work that gives you valuable behind-the-scenes perspectives on what makes a good grant. And we hear from folks that this experience is actually very valuable in helping them improve their grant writing capabilities. So we always have open calls for MSAC's grant programs for panelists, and you can find more information about those calls on msac.org under the About tab in ways to get involved. That's the boilerplate. Thank you for your patience. And now, as they say, for the main program. This is a brief overview of where we're going today. I'll start with an overview of the Folklife Apprenticeship Program, give you an introduction to it and its goals. We'll then talk about some of the nuts and bolts of making an application to this program, which is currently open for the fiscal 25 cycle. More on that in a moment. Then transition into application strategies, how to make a strong application within this program, and finish up with your questions. Do please feel invited to ask questions within the chat feature at any time, and I will address them when we get to that final Q&A session. The reason we're all here, MSAC's Folklife Apprenticeship Program. Broadly speaking, the apprenticeship program supports education in the traditional arts between one master artist and one apprentice artist for up to 1 year. It's a flat $5,000 grant per apprenticeship team. And for fiscal 25, I believe we are scheduled to award up to 15 apprenticeship teams. So 30 people supported in teams of 2. Please note that this grant only supports education between one master artist and one apprentice artist. We cannot support teams that feature more than 2 people. So no teams of 2 master artists and an apprentice, no teams of one master artist and 2 apprentices or more. It's just a one-on-one program. Folklife Apprenticeship is open to any community-based living cultural tradition which is handed down by example or word of mouth. And I'll talk more about this in a moment, but I do want to clarify that the tradition itself that you're proposing to study within the context of this grant can be derived from anywhere in the world. We often get some folks expressing confusion over, well, I don't do a Maryland-based tradition, which, understandable, but as long as you are a resident in the state, and we'll talk more about that in a moment as well, the tradition you propose to study can be from anywhere in the world. And those traditions can run the gamut. Here's a brief outline of some of the broader types of traditions that we have had the pleasure of supporting and funding over the years. And this is the part where I always get a little tongue-tied because we're very fortunate to have funded a large variety of traditions within each of these separate bullet points. But for example, if you are engaged in a performance-based traditional arts, such as Hindustani dance, or within music, such as banjo, Black storytelling. In the previous slide, and I'll go back here, you saw a form of theater. This is cranky puppetry theater. There are many other types of theater we have supported over the years as well. We also support material traditional arts, for example, such as costuming. Currently, right now, actually, there's a Folklife Apprenticeship on Yoruba mask costume design, which is very exciting. Also, craft. Recently, we supported a Baltimore Botanic style jewelry Folklife Apprenticeship. Also, food. visual traditions, as well as occupational traditions. And these are things that tend to exist kind of, if I can phrase it this way, kind of on the fringe of the typical types of things that MSAC funds. So for example, agricultural traditions are a very valid and eligible series of traditions. For example, right now there is a kitchen gardening Folklife apprenticeship currently receiving funding during the current cycle. We've also funded architectural traditions such as blacksmithing, or maritime traditions, boat building, net gearing, oyster harvesting. Again, not things that you typically think of as the arts, but things that very comfortably fall underneath the umbrella of the traditional arts that Maryland Traditions was founded in order to better support. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many other types of traditions that we are happy to and have funded over the years. This is designed to give you a kind of a broad idea of what is possible and what is eligible. I mentioned earlier that eligibility for this program does require Maryland residency, and unfortunately that does require Maryland residency for both the master artist and the apprentice artist. We are not able to support apprenticeships where either master or apprentice lives out of state. Within the context of the application, master artists should be able to demonstrate vital contributions to their particular cultural tradition. And I know this sounds a little vague, and it's designed to be that way precisely because we are able to support such a wide variety and rich diversity in traditions. So what a demonstration of a vital contribution looks like in one tradition is not necessarily going to be a clear way of demonstrating that contribution in another tradition. So for example, if you are a musician and a vital contribution might be invitations to teach at traditional arts programs, or you maintain an active teaching calendar or studio, those are ways to demonstrate vital contributions. There are many, many others. Similarly, apprentice artists should be able to demonstrate some kind of prior experience or basic skill level, and perhaps most importantly, a longer-term commitment to learning within that particular tradition. We do not require that apprentice artists are masters in their own right. This is, of course, an education grant, and the point is that across the up to 1 year of study, that they gain experience, they gain an increase in skill sets or depth of understanding of those skill sets. But we are not able to support raw beginners. We want folks, apprentice artists in the position of apprentice artists, to have some prior experience within that cultural context. Panelists who adjudicate the Folklife apprenticeship are doing so through 5 criteria. They are listed here on the screen. They are also available in greater detail along with the scoring rubric in the grant guidelines, which I'll introduce you to in a brief moment. The 5 criteria that panelists are reviewing are first the traditional nature of the proposed form of folklife. Essentially, does the application include sufficient information for panelists to comfortably say, yes, I know that this is such and such tradition, such and such form of folklife, whatever it might be, and it is very clear that it is a tradition. The second criterion is the expertise of the master artist. Is there enough information within the context of the application for panelists to say comfortably that yes, they understand that the proposed master artist is indeed an expert in their field, in their tradition, and that they are recognized as such by their community? Third is the preparedness of the apprentice artists. And again, we don't want apprentice artists to be experts in the tradition. That is kind of contrary to the point, but we do want them to be prepared. If, for example, we're talking about a textile-based tradition, do they understand how to use a sewing machine? Or if it's a slightly different textile tradition, do they know how to use knitting needles? If it's a maritime tradition, have they spent time on a boat before? Brand new novices to a boat in a maritime tradition, probably not going to demonstrate the most, a preferable or a clear volume of preparedness on the part of the learner. The fourth criterion is the potential impact of the apprenticeship on the continued vitality of the tradition. Essentially, how will funding this particular Folklife apprenticeship affect the community of origin? How will it affect the longevity of the tradition? Hopefully it will support both of those things, and panelists are going to be adjudicating whether or not the application provides them sufficient information to be able to comfortably say, yes, I can see a very positive long-term impact that this apprenticeship will have upon the tradition. And then finally, the fifth review criterion that panelists are going to be adjudicating for is the feasibility of the work plan. The apprenticeship is available for up to 1 year, July through June. And within that 1 year, panelists are going to be looking at the work plan. Is this enough? Is it too much? Is the application proposing more than is possible within that 1 year? Or less? Again, it's up to 1 year. It could be 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. But again, the question is, given the amount of time proposed for this period of study, does the work plan make sense? Is there enough volume, or is there too little or too much? And it really is on you, the applicants, to demonstrate within the application not only what the work plan includes, but why it is in fact enough and why it is an appropriate volume of stuff. I can use a very technical term there, an appropriate volume of stuff to be studying within this context. I will note that obviously, again, every single tradition that comes into an application is going to look very different one from another. So we recommend that you, the applicants, essentially tell panelists quite explicitly why the master artist is an expert, why the apprentice is prepared, and give examples. Merely saying that, yes, I'm a master artist and I am an expert, is going to be insufficient. Panelists need to be able to point to evidence to say, yes, master artist is an expert because they were invited to show their quilts at these places, which are very important within that tradition. It's a recognition of their mastery. Yes, the work plan is enough. It is an appropriate amount. I know that the panelists might say because the amount of time devoted each month or each week makes sense because the application tells me that. I also want to point out that within the feasibility of the work plan, again, it's going to look different tradition by tradition because some of the traditions that we've had the privilege of fielding over the years are tied seasonally. And if I can draw an example, a few cycles ago, we were very fortunate to be able to fund a woolwork Folklife apprenticeship. And that woolwork apprenticeship quite literally followed the cycle of sheep husbandry. So birthing of sheep, shearing of sheep. When you shear the sheep, then there's a series of processes that the artists go through in terms of preparing the wool, dyeing the wool, using it, weaving with it, knitting with it, etc. So that work plan very specifically tied in seasonally what was happening with the sheep at any given time. And they explained within the context of that, of their project and their goals, that that was really the only way it could work. That's not going to be accurate for many other types of traditions, or other types of seasonal relationships with time are going to be more appropriate, and sometimes none at all. You know, if you're working specifically, for example, within a music or choreographic tradition, season may have little or nothing to do with the tradition, and that's perfectly fine. But explaining to panelists why the schedule makes sense within the context of this specific tradition is really going to be key. Here you see a timeline of our current cycle or forthcoming cycle of the Folklife Apprenticeship. For future reference, this is the fiscal year 2025, by which we mean July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. Maryland state fiscal year runs on the July to June cycle. Applications are open now for Folklife Apprenticeship and will close March 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So please have your applications in by that deadline. They will be reviewed between March and May by panelists, first during an at-home review and then during a virtual public meeting. And if you're interested in applying, if you apply for and are interested in attending that virtual meeting, information will be posted on msac.org at a later date. Applicants will be noticed of their status in July 2024, at which point funds will be begun to be processed for awardees. And the expectation is that unless, again, there's some kind of seasonal connection here, the expectation is that awardees will begin working together within the apprenticeship beginning in July 2024, going through no later than June 2025. To make the application, We first recommend that you begin with our grant guidelines. This is true for Folklife Apprenticeship and for each and every MSAC grant program. If you go to the program page on msac.org for apprenticeship, or again, any other MSAC grant, in the upper right-hand corner of that program page, you will see a yellow quick resources box. On the slide here, the blue arrows are pointing to it. And within those quick resources boxes, you will see a link to a PDF of the grant guidelines. They look something like this. It's a free PDF download. It makes great bedtime reading. I highly recommend it. It will put you to sleep instantly. But despite the soporific nature of these grant guidelines, they are designed to contain answers to any and every question we can think you might have for us in general terms. And there will always be questions that we can't conceptualize that won't be answered in here. But contact information, the panelist rubric, deadlines, dates, schedules, eligibility questions, everything is contained within these grant guidelines. So we strongly urge you to start here, read it through, and if you still have questions, always feel invited to reach out to us. My contact information is in the grant guidelines. My contact information is on the program page. My contact information is elsewhere on MSAC's website. We try to make ourselves very available to you, and we hope you will be in touch with those questions. Once you have reviewed the grant guidelines and are still interested in making an application, the next step is to open up Smart Simple. Smart Simple is MSAC's grants management software. It's online, and if I go back here to our website screenshot, you'll notice here in the upper right-hand corner in this red banner at the top, and this is across every single MSAC web page, you'll see a link to Smart Simple, which will lead you to that landing page. Sign in if you already have an account. If you do not have an account, you can register for a free account. All of this is free. The registration button is on the screen here in the lower left-hand corner. You'll see those red arrows pointing to it. I will note, organizations are not eligible, are not able to apply for a Folklife apprenticeship. Only independent artists are able to apply for an apprenticeship. So even if you have, for example, a 501c3 or an organization's account through Smart Simple, you will not be able to apply for the apprenticeship and will need instead to create a new independent artist account. Once you're inside Smart Simple, you'll see a dashboard that looks something like this. The red arrows there are pointing to the funding opportunities. The actual number there will change as time goes on. But now, until March 1st at 11:59, you will see the Folklife apprenticeship available in the list there to be applied for. You go in there and you click apply, and we recommend that you save your work frequently because the internet is the internet and it is never consistent, as we all know, to our detriment. I will note, though, that you do not have to complete the application in one sitting. That you are welcome to work a little bit, save the application, come back to it in a day, a week, roughly a month. So again, not something you have to complete in one gulp. I want to move now into application strategies. We like to recommend to folks that when they're applying for a Folklife apprenticeship, to write for an audience who knows nothing about your specific tradition. Write for an audience who is intelligent. We're very fortunate to work with a number of very intelligent panelists. But statistically speaking, it is quite impossible for us to be able to put together panels of experts in every single tradition that comes before the panel. It's statistically impossible. So instead, we recommend that within the application, you write for people who are of average intelligence, who understand how a tradition works, even though they might not know how yours specifically works or anything about your specific tradition. And to explain it to them, again, kind of at that 101, that basic introductory level. I will say that we've been very consistently able to put together panels that often feature at least one, sometimes multiple former or current grantees of the Folklife Apprenticeship grant. So they are often aware of how the grant works and what a successful application looks like because they've created one, which again, give particular insight into the grant. But that's not the same thing to say that they understand how every tradition works, even though they might be experts in their own traditions. We also recommend that folks take advantage of the supplemental materials section within the application. Now, I mentioned those 5 criteria. There are very few sections within the application that are considered unscored. One of those unscored sections is the supplemental materials section, but although it's not scored, it can contain an awful lot of information that helps panelists more easily score those 5 criteria higher. Supplemental materials can include any variety of things. For example, posters of events, letters of recommendation, photos, links to video, links to articles, or PDF copies of articles that you have been featured in or written, or that have been written about you or about your tradition. We recommend very specifically, though, that you use the supplemental materials section in order to provide panelists with a taste and not with a whole meal. We specifically do not recommend you try to be exhaustive. You don't have the word count, you don't have the space, you don't have the upload size to be exhaustive. Also, we've observed that applications that try to be exhaustive and explain everything about a tradition tend to overwhelm panelists. It almost requires of them more intellectual labor and work. And just kind of thinking psychologically here, the less labor panelists have to do in order to understand what your tradition is and what you're proposing to do in this apprenticeship, the more likely they are to like your application. We do train panelists on unconscious bias, which is exactly the opposite of what I just said, trying to train them away from that kind of thing. But we also tell panelists to take advantage of it. Try to make panelists' lives easier by feeding them information, making it very clear what it is you're doing, what you want to do, and what your tradition is. And the supplemental materials section is a really effective way to do that. So, for example, within the questions, the prose questions, the text box was within the application. Master artists, you might say something like, yes, I am an expert in my field. I have been invited to perform or show my work at these 3 venues. Please see supplemental materials section, page 2. And on page 2, you might feature a poster of a concert you gave, or a review of that concert, or a letter of recommendation from the curator of that gallery in which your quilts hung, who are able to speak to you, the role that you play, the importance of you and your work within the tradition, how well you are respected and regarded by the community of practice or the community of origin in that tradition. Apprentice artists, you might use the supplemental sections similarly. I have gained basic knowledge of how to use, I'm going to stick with the textiles for the moment because that's what's in my head. I have learned the basic skill sets to be able to make a quilt. And please see supplemental materials section, page 4. And on page 4, you might have a photograph of the first quilt that you ever made, demonstrating that, you've done the thing. You are demonstrating preparedness. You've actually put together an entire quilt, which, as we know, can be quite a large amount of labor. But again, use the supplemental materials section to provide evidence, that cliche that a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000 pictures. Using these materials to provide a taste and to provide evidence to support the assertions that you make elsewhere within the application. My colleagues and I at MSAC provide a series of what we call technical assistance. Deliberately vague term that covers an awful lot of ground. Technical assistance includes, for example, this webinar today. It can include one-on-one virtual conversations where we talk over application strategies very specific to your tradition and to you who are the master artist who wants to teach this very specific apprentice artist. Technical assistance can include conversations about your budget and clarifying it or tweaking it or improving it, or maybe taking these things out because they aren't quite eligible to make a stronger budget. Technical assistance can be me reading draft of your application, reading the prose and providing you feedback on it, either in real time with you there and during a virtual meeting or on my own. And within our application strategies, we recommend that you take advantage of this more than once. Conceptualize technical assistance as more than a one-time resource. Have me read 3 drafts. Have 2 conversations with me, or more. And this goes for me both with Folklife Apprenticeship and for my colleagues and myself across all of MSAC's grant programs. We are literally paid our paychecks in part so that we can provide you technical assistance to improve your applications. And I will say that those conversations are often some of the most fun we get to have as grants administrators. So please feel invited to be in touch at any time. Please feel invited to take advantage of technical assistance. And with one caveat, that you please give us enough time to be able to provide you feedback, typically 2 weeks, often because we are all of us providing technical assistance at a high volume. So in order to be able to both meet that volume and also give your work the time and attention that it deserves, please budget about 2 weeks. If you're emailing me at 9 p.m. on March 1st, 3 hours before the deadline, I guarantee you you're not going to get any technical assistance. But if you're emailing me 2 weeks ahead of that deadline, much higher probability of technical assistance. So please feel invited to be in touch. Please feel invited to take advantage of technical assistance. Finally, within our application strategies, and I mentioned this at the very top of the webinar, we recommend that you apply to be a panelist yourself. We hear from many panelists that the experience of doing panelist work actually improves their ability to write effective grants. Kind of seeing how it works from the other side, thinking like a panelist makes it easier to write a good quality grant application. Now, I will say that we are not currently accepting panelists for the Folklife Apprenticeship cycle that we're talking about, that we're in right now and accepting applications for. We've already have a very strong panel for that meeting. Excuse me, a very strong panel for this cycle. But going down the line, I anticipate that we will have an open call for the next cycle of panelists open in late summer, ideally August. And we have, again, open calls for panelists for MSAC programs across the calendar year. So it's a transferable skill set. If you do panelist work, excuse me, for example, for the Creativity Grant or the Folklife Network Grant, that is going to help you with your grant writing skills across any grant. I hope I mentioned this earlier, panelist work is paid work. So it's professional development paid at a high level. I think we're very fortunate to have one of the highest levels of payment going to panelists in the country right now, which we recently increased actually. Since inflation has been going up, we were able to increase the amount that we pay panelists. So again, this is paid work that is advantageous to you in terms of professional development. So we hope that you will take advantage of that and help us increase the amount of grants that we're able to give out. Because without you working as panelists, we can't get money out the door. So you are very vital to our efforts, and we're very grateful to you. That is my presentation. Here is my contact information. And as I said, you can find my contact information on msac.org in numerous places, including on the Folklife Apprenticeship Folklife Apprenticeship program page, as well as other places as well. I do hope you will be in touch. And I'd like to open up now to anyone who has any questions. Feel free to use the raise hand function. Feel free to type your question into the chat as you prefer. And if you have a question, but you're not quite able to figure out how to articulate it, I hope you will ask it at a later date as well. Or if something comes up for you after you've had time to think about this presentation, I hope you will, again, please be in touch. And while folks consider their questions, I will just add that, again, we have been recording today's webinar, and that the recording will be going up on YouTube probably early next week as a public resource, and it will be linked from the Folklife Apprenticeship program page. So again, thank you all so much for joining us, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Rue asks if there's anything comparable to this in the Dallas area. Yes, Rue, unfortunately, you are not eligible for funding through the Maryland Traditions Program because of your residency. Most states have something comparable to this. Let me take a look. It looks like Texas Folklife, which you can access at texasfolklife.org, does have an apprenticeship program. And it looks like the application cycle just passed on December 15th. But I will put a link to that program in the chat for you to follow up with later, and hopefully be able to apply to their program in the future. Claire says, thank you. You're very welcome, Claire. Thank you for joining us. Maria asks for the information. The presentation will be shared online. The recording will be online on our YouTube page, available for free, and it will also be linked from the Folklife Apprenticeship Program page as soon as it is live on the website. Paul asks if an apprentice can be a Maryland resident and the teacher a Pennsylvania resident. Unfortunately, Paul, they cannot. I will tell you, frankly, this is a source of frustration for me personally, just because Maryland is such a strangely shaped state and has a lot of pinch areas with communities that cross political borders. But unfortunately, the rationale that we have received is because all MSAC grants are paid for with your Maryland resident tax dollars, that those tax dollars have to stay in state, which translates in this context that both master artists and apprentice artists must be Maryland residents. But there are a couple of arts organizations in the region who I'm hoping in the next 5 years might be able to offer some kind of cross-border program. I say that as not a promise or anything. I'm just saying the conversations are beginning, because this is a request we receive fairly often. So don't hold me to that, because I don't have the power there, but that is something that we are talking about. Megan asks if there are info sessions or recorded information sessions for the Folklife Network grant. Megan, not that I'm aware of. The Folklife Network is actually a closed network similar to the county arts agencies. And at the moment, MSAC is not accepting applications for additional Folklife or for regional Folklife centers. I do believe, though, that we will very soon have an open call for panelists for the Folklife Network program. So Megan, if that's something you're interested in checking out, let me pull that URL up so I can share it with y'all. We would love to invite you to apply to be a panelist for that program, and you can find more information at the URL I just pasted in here, msac.org, under the Abouts tab. You scroll down to the panelists tab, and yes, we do have a current request for applications for panelists for the Folklife Network, which closes on February 15th. So just a little less than a month there. Let's see. Miranda and Nick ask if successful applicants, if recipients of the Folklife Apprenticeship, have to provide updates as you're completing the apprenticeship, if there's a certain hour requirement. Wonderful question. Thank you both so much for this. So there is, the answer to that question is yes and no. The yes part is that we do require everyone who receives any MSAC grant to complete what we call a final report. It's always due the August after the grant completes. So for the current cycle, we're looking at a final report deadline of August 15th, 2025. Lots of time between now and then. And I will say that final reports are designed to be a very light lift, so probably shouldn't take more than anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours maximum. It's designed to be very easy. And this is always subject to budgetary access. And we won't know that until we know that, so probably June. But in the past few years, and I don't anticipate this changing, we've been able to provide Folklife Apprenticeship grantees, not all of them, unfortunately, but a large number of each year's class of apprenticeship teams. We've been able to supply them what we call site visits. And this very generic term refers to one of two things. You'll have noticed a series of very gorgeous photographs across the presentation today. These all derive from photo site visits that we've been able to give folks going back to 2007 or 8, I think. We've got a large volume of these. Photo site visits are 3 hours long in one single chunk of time, so not 1 hour 3 times, but 1 3-hour chunk of time. in which one of our contract photographers comes out and documents the Folklife apprenticeship, the master artist, the apprentice, the tradition. These photos then go to the apprenticeship team for them to use to market themselves and their tradition. They come to MSAC for us to market the apprenticeship, as you see in this presentation, and they also enter the Maryland Traditions Archives, which is a public repository that you're welcome to access. It's housed at UMBC with MSAC oversight. That's photo site visits. We're also able to provide a series of what we call video site visits. And these are obviously a longer amount of time spent doing this, but they result in a 4 to 6 minute long documentary short film. And we have, let's see if I can pull one up here. Oh, I can, excellent. And we're gonna get an ad, of course we are. So the documentary short films are, again, done by one of our media contractors, Wide Angle Youth Media. They are beautiful, they are excellent quality. And again, the Folklife Apprenticeship team receives copies of them to market themselves, market their tradition. We use them again to market the same. We're actually submitting them to film festivals in the region. So if that's something you're tuned into and interested in learning more about, you might actually see some of them there, but they're also all available on YouTube for public access. I share all of this because these are not requirements. A Folklife Apprenticeship team is never obliged to accept a site visit, but they are free to the team. They are designed to be useful to the apprenticeship team as well as to MSAC, that we can continue to market the program and the awesome work that artists are doing. And they are as close as we get to any kinds of like internal checks beyond that single required final report. Jenny says, as a potential apprentice, I could use suggestions about how to approach a master artist and introduce them to this opportunity. Great question, Jenny. I should note that we at MSAC are not able to provide any kind of a dating service. We don't match apprentice artists with master artists. That's really beyond our capacity. And in some cases, we just don't have the network within any given tradition to be able to provide that service. However, in the instances where we do have that kind of network available, usually with previous grantees, we are able to sometimes facilitate introductions, although of course there's no way to guarantee that introduction will result in an application, let alone a successful one. I will note that if you go to the program page and scroll down a little bit, let me find that again myself, so I'm looking at what I'm talking about. Within the grants awarded section on the program page, you'll see a series of lists from the previous 5 years of grantees, but there's also a link to a research guide from the Maryland Traditions Archives, housed at UMBC, that lists every single awardee and grantee that Maryland Traditions has supported since it started supporting. So we're going back to 2007, I think, and 2004, or is it 2004 and 2001? Anyway, just barely past the new millennium, and the full list is there. So many of those folks are represented in media within the archive, within the site visits, within the documentary short films. So recommend you check out those. And again, Jenny, if there's someone that you're interested in getting a connection to, sometimes we are able to facilitate those, sometimes we are not. It depends on a lot of factors, including the capacity of the person being contacted. Katita asks, may I apply for my father who may find the application cumbersome? Absolutely. And I will also note that we mentioned the Maryland Folklife Network in passing. The 8 regional Folklife centers that are geographically scattered around the state are also able to provide technical assistance on applications, again, at different rates based off of their institutional capacity, of course. But Katita, if you are looking for technical assistance from me, happy to supply it. Your local regional Folklife center might also be able to provide you some help there, but you are able to make the application on behalf of someone else, as long as that someone else is a Maryland resident, of course. The residency rule does continue to apply. Slim says, thank you. You're very welcome, Slim. Glad to have you here. And Slim asks also, if I have an apprentice in a related Folklife skill, would I be eligible to be a master artist with a different apprentice? I'm not sure I understand your question, Slim. Any single person can participate in only one Folklife apprenticeship in any given fiscal year. Master artists can participate in as many Folklife apprenticeship grants that you want to apply for and are awarded funding for. Apprentice artists can apply for and receive, or can receive only 3 Folklife apprenticeships per decade. So if you're an apprentice artist, you can be an apprentice artist 3 times in any single 10-year chunk of time. And because many folks are involved in many different traditions and have skill levels at different levels within those respective traditions, for example, a master artist in one tradition can apply for and successfully work as an apprentice in another tradition in another fiscal year. Again, you can only hold one apprenticeship per fiscal year, whether you are the master artist or an apprentice artist, and you're welcome to work with different apprentices across different fiscal years, but only one apprentice per year. That was a lot of word salad. Slim, did that answer your question? I see a thumbs up. Wonderful. Oh, and Miranda asked a question that I think I just answered. How many times can an apprentice be awarded the grant? Once per fiscal year, up to 3 times within a decade. And Miranda asks again, could a master apprentice apply for the following year's application with a different apprentice? Absolutely, we've had that happen a number of times. And actually, we've had a master artist, I think in the last 2 fiscal years, who's taught 2 different apprentices within consecutive fiscal years. So yes, certainly eligible for that. I also should mention, I don't think I have, relatives may apply together. The master artist can be the parent, the aunt, the uncle, the grandparent of the apprentice artist. The so-called nepotism rules do not apply here because many times traditions are passed down through families. So if you are related within the Folklife apprenticeship, you are very much eligible. I think at any given time there's almost always at least one Folklife apprenticeship where the team is related in some way, and usually more than one in any given fiscal year. Jenny, if I didn't answer your question earlier, please feel free to unmute and ask it. But if my various word salads did answer it, happy to be of service. Paul asks, if the master artist offers all types of classes within a folk art, can we use this grant as an apprentice to take a series of classes with that artist? That is to say, use the entire grant to pay the master for the courses. So, Paul, the problem with this particular approach is that the apprenticeship supports one master artist teaching one apprentice artist. Now, there are very few contexts in which we're able to support what you're proposing. That is, the apprentice artist studying as part of a larger course with the master artist. The only context we're able to do that is when the tradition itself features a large group of people. So, for example, the Brazilian martial dance art called capoeira is almost always done within a group context. It's almost never just 2 people. But the expectation there, for example, is that the master artist will spend additional time working with the apprentice artist, even though some of the apprenticeship might occur within the context of a class. But specifically using the apprenticeship to pay a master artist for the courses they're teaching is not an eligible use of it. I will, however, draw your attention to another MSAC program which could be used in the way you're proposing. That is the Professional Development Opportunity Grant, which can indeed pay for essentially coursework that as you're proposing here. It's a maximum $2,000 grant, and I will put a link to that in the chat. And I will also note that unlike the Folklife Apprenticeship, where everything has to stay in-state, Professional Development Opportunity Fund can facilitate your study in-state, out-of-state, virtually, nationally, internationally. Lots of different options with that one. It's one of our more flexible grants by design. If I'm seeing everyone's questions, that looks like I've answered everything that's in the chat. Oh, Paul asks about private instruction. Yes, one-on-one private instruction with an instructor, with a master artist is eligible. But again, it would need to be a tailored work plan such that what you're studying with that master artist. Paul, let's talk. because it sounds like you might be perhaps engaged in a tradition that kind of skirts that gray area, in which case the successful, strong application would boil down to what's in the prose, what it is that you're explaining to the panelists, to say that, yes, what I'm doing is kind of in this gray area, but it makes sense within the context of the tradition because. So happy to schedule a conversation with you or have the conversation by email, whichever you prefer. And that goes for everyone, of course. Again, technical assistance looks different person by person, tradition by tradition, applicant by applicant. And I hope you will take advantage of it. And I will just return to this contact information page and invite you all to please be in touch. We are paid to be public servants. You are our public. We serve you, and we are paid so to do. So we hope you will take advantage of that fact. Please be in touch with questions, and unless there are no others within the chat, and I'm not seeing any, I think we might call this webinar a day. And I'll just note that, again, the recording from today will be going up on our YouTube page very shortly, probably early next week, and then linked from the Folklife Apprenticeship program page. So if you want to refresh your memory on what we've talked about, I hope you will access it there. Thank you all so much for joining us.